The West Coast Mainline Birmingham to Crewe add-on was developed by All Aboard Studios and released on the 22nd of October 2025, but only for PC and 9th generation consoles. It's available on Steam, or wherever the Gen 9 console players get their add-ons, for £30 or 57 New Zealand dollars at full price. It's worth remembering, even if just for preserving history, that this route had a disastrous initial launch, primarily on consoles, but PC players were still affected too. But I don't necessarily blame All Aboard Studios themselves for this situation. Instead, I believe that it's mainly the fault of Doesn't Test Games, as they're the publishers of this content, and they were the ones who let an apparently outdated build of the route released to the public in the first place. Unfortunately, there has since been a pattern of DTG releasing the wrong build of a given add-on for initial launch. From what I gather, the problems with this particular route included, but were certainly not limited to, the infamous blurry textures on consoles, AI trains in timetable mode running past red signals, and performance issues throughout the whole route. If I recall correctly, one of the DTG people even suggested that players disable layers to improve the route's performance. That suggestion didn't go down well with a lot of people because they were essentially being advised to remove content, for which they paid, just to get a stable experience in-game. Apparently, numerous problems on the Birmingham to Crewe route have since been fixed, but given just how much the add-ons typically cost these days, I would argue that it's unacceptable for Dovetail Games to be releasing them in a rough state, regardless of whether or not PC players are affected by the same amount of issues as console players. Incidentally, there's another organisation here in New Zealand whose initials also happen to be DTG, and I would say these guys are more respectable than the silly sods from Chatham. In this case, DTG stands for Diesel Traction Group, and they restore 1950s era diesel locomotives to operational condition. At least one of them, namely DI-1102, is even mainline certified. Thinking back to the Birmingham to Crewe route, I held off from buying it for a fair while, and in the end, I paid $45.59 NZD for my copy, as it was 20% off during Dovetail's 2026 May Madness sale. We already had Birmingham New Street in TSW as part of the Cross City Line add-on of November 2022. Come to think of it, Crewe was already in TSW as well, albeit as part of the notorious Spirit of Steam route, which is set in 1958, while All Aboard Studios' route is set in 2019. See my video about the worst routes in TSW for an explanation of why I would not recommend Barely Captures the Spirit of Steam. Incidentally, I actually went to Liverpool Lime Street in real life, and it was interesting seeing just how much the station has changed since 1958. There are 11 stations on the Birmingham to Crewe section, and it's interesting to note that the character of the route changes quite significantly depending on which side of Wolverhampton you're on. The southern side is slower paced with closer station spacing, while the northern side has fewer stations and the opportunity to crack along at up to 100 miles per hour, or even 125 if you're driving the Class 390.
The next train to arrive at Platform 1 will be the 10:52 London North Western Railway service to London Euston, calling at Stafford, Rugeley Trent Valley, Lichfield Trent Valley, Tamworth, Atherstone, Nuneaton, Rugby, Milton Keynes Central, and London Euston. Platform 1 for the 10:52 London North Western Railway service to London Euston.
Between Wolverhampton and Crewe, there are only two more intermediate stations, namely Penkridge and Stafford. Personally, I think Crewe to Stafford is the most boring part of the route, due to it being a rather long gap of well over 10 miles between stations, so there isn't much to do on that section. Birmingham to Crewe isn't the only section of the West Coast Main Line to be developed as a new add-on for TSW6, as Just Trains have also been working on the Preston to Crewe section, thus continuing a theme of their routes that are centred around Preston, although the Preston to Crewe add-on has yet to be released at the time of this video's production. In any case, This made me wonder why we're getting so many sections of the West Coast Main Line in TSW, but we still only have one section of the East Coast Main Line, and what a lot of people consider to be the most boring section of the ECML at that. The ECML conundrum aside, once you've got all the right routes, you'll be able to drive from London Euston all the way to Carlisle in TSW, with route hopping required at Milton Keynes Central, Crewe and Preston. It's a pity that the upcoming WCML Trent Valley add-on doesn't include the Rugby to Birmingham New Street via Coventry section. What's the bet that'll be modelled for TSW as its own separate route add-on at some point? Only one train, namely the Class 350 electric multiple unit, is included with the Birmingham to Crewe route. This train was not a new addition to TSW, as she was already available with the WCML London to Milton Keynes route, but in that case, Dovetail only bothered including the 350/1 for whatever reason, and the train has no branding in her default state. In the case of the AABS route, the 350/2 and 350/3 are also along for the ride, complete with accurate detail differences, such as the 3x2 seating layout on the 350/2 and lack of third rail equipment on the 350/2 and 350/3. Out of all the subclasses, only the 350/1 has dual voltage capabilities. Other improvements to the 350 include, but are not limited to, overhauled suspension, more accurate door and coupling logic, better audio for the door beeps, and smoother sensitivity on the combined throttle and brake lever. I especially like the smoother sensitivity because I wasn't a fan of the overly sensitive throttle on the 350/1 from WCML South. Speaking of that route, the 350/2 and 350/3 have layers in the timetable that comes with the Class 805, thus finally breaking up the monotony of only seeing 350/1s on every single LNWR service. The 350s included with Birmingham to Crewe are supplied in LNWR or ex-London Midland liveries, albeit without branding in their default states, but PC players can get a branding patch from the TrainSim community website. Curiously, you also get a photobombing Class 150. You also get a special British Transport Police livery, as worn by units 350-235, but only one coach in the unit actually has a full BTP scheme. As an aside, but still on the topic of the BTP, I couldn't believe how many times I heard train announcements in the UK beating you over the head with that blasted text BTP on 61016/see it say it sorted message. To be fair, I understand why they make that announcement in the first place, but the problem, at least in my eyes, was that it was played so often that I wouldn't be surprised if regular passengers completely zone out and don't take any notice of the message. Incidentally, the see it say it sorted message is included in the 350's set of announcements on the Birmingham to Crewe route.
This is British Transport Police. If you notice something out of the ordinary, speak to a member of staff or text us on 61016 and we'll get it sorted. That's 61016. See it, say it, sorted.
And before I forget, I'll do a comparison between the sounds on the in-game 350 and her real-life counterpart. The route's default 2019-era timetable features a total of 170 playable services for the Class 350, and you can run express services all the way to Crewe or local services that only go as far as Wolverhampton. Speaking of which, the 350 with British Transport Police decals is only drivable on 7 stopping services between Birmingham New Street and Wolverhampton, a section that takes around 27 minutes to cover on the stopper. As for what the 350 is like to drive, she isn't much different from the other one-handle units that dominate the TSW scene, but I will say that the version included with this route feels more solid, where physics are concerned, than the 350-1 from WCML South. However, I came across a quite frankly infuriating bug on the Class 350 at one point. One time, I was on the final approach to Milton Keynes with a pair of 350-3s, one of which happened to be a unit that I'd travelled on in real life, when the AWS forced a penalty brake application out of nowhere. I wasn't breaking the speed limit, and was a fair way out from the red signal at the end of the platform. Despite several attempts to reset the train, and her AWS and TPWS systems, the brakes refused to release. I tried everything that I could think of, including resetting the simulation physics multiple times, but nothing worked. Everything was going fine right up until I was close to the very end of the run, so because of that unexpected penalty brake application, all that time spent driving the blasted train up from London Euston was effectively wasted. Surely I'm not the only one who has seen this issue with the Class 350's brakes. Sure, you could just run the Class 350 with AWS and a TPWS isolated, but I would argue that that shouldn't be one's only option for a way to actually finish a service in this blasted train. When people pay premium prices for Train Sim World DLC, they shouldn't have to put up with major bugs like the 350's brakes not releasing after a penalty brake application. On the topic of major bugs that should have been fixed already, I spotted at least one instance of a train somehow being stopped off-path between Smethwick Galton Bridge and Sandwell and Dudley, so I had to remove that train in order to clear the backlog of other trains that were stuck behind it. To be clear, I'm not blaming All Aboard Studios for the dispatcher problem, because it is a core issue that I've seen on other routes, such as the Pfälzische Ludwigsbahn. Meanwhile, it takes around 54 to 65 minutes, sometimes longer, to cover the full run from Birmingham to Crewe or vice versa, depending on your stopping pattern and whether you're in a 350, 390 or 805. As is often the case with these busier TSW routes, numerous add-ons are required for timetable mode layers to make the rail scene on Birmingham to Crewe feel anywhere near realistic, with the add-ons in question being the Cross Country Class 220, Avanti West Coast Class 390, West Midlands/Cross Country Class 170, Cardiff City Network, Birmingham Cross City, Midland Main Line, WCML London to Milton Keynes, WCML Preston to Carlisle, barely captures the spirit of steam, LNER A3 Flying Scotsman, Cargo Line Volume 3, and the Glossop Line. The total cost of all that lot is a ridiculous $493.51 NZD at full price, at least on Steam. The presence of 390s in the refurbished Avanti West Coast livery is unrealistic for a route set in 2019, so one wonders if someone will make a modified timetable for this route and a Virgin Trains livery for the Class 390, if a modified timetable hasn't been made yet. Meanwhile, the Class 150 and Class 153 from Cardiff City Network are used to represent the Birmingham to Aberystwyth services, but this is unrealistic because, in real life, those services are actually operated by Class 158s. Here's hoping that we'll get a Transport for Wales Class 158 in TSW someday, ideally as part of a route add-on going from Shrewsbury to Aberystwyth and Porthlally. WCML Preston to Carlisle, Spirit of Slop, and Salmon Trout in Disguise are required for rail tour layers on the Birmingham to Crewe route. I don't know about you, but personally, I'm getting bored of all these modern image UK routes getting rail tour layers, especially when they use rolling stock that's unrealistic for 21st century mainline rail tours, but at least you can disable the layers if you want to. The only preservation-era steam locomotives in the game are Flying Scotsman and the two Jubilee reskins from Rivet's half-assed West Cornwall Steam Rail Tour pack, while the Jubilee and 8F from Spirit of Slop are working days engines, so they haven't got AWS, TPWS, or GSMR equipment. The Class 87 that comes with WCML Preston to Carlisle isn't a preservation-era model either, although I suppose you could at least see if the locomotive will load as 87002 Royal Sovereign, which is preserved and runs mainline excursions in real life. When I was recording for this video, the 87s on that rail tour service would only load as 87009 City of Birmingham and 87004 Britannia. Come to think of it, I'd be interested in buying the one-off Class 89 Badger electric locomotive as a TSW add-on, since the real 89001 has been restored to mainline running condition and is now based in Crewe. There's a new 2025 era timetable included with the Class 805 add-on of January 2026. This has a total of 2,171 services, of which only 510 are drivable, and there are 37 playable services for the Class 805 herself, 137 services for the Class 350, 8 for the Class 66, 25 for the Class 150/2, 15 for the Class 153, 4 for the Class 158, 62 for the Class 220 Voyager, 3 for the Class 323, 92 for the Class 390 Pendolino, and 1 rail tour service each for Flying Scotsman and the LMS Jubilee. Curiously, only 3 of the Class 805's services are full-length runs between Birmingham and Crewe or vice versa, as most of her services run via the Trent Valley. On this route, those Trent Valley services are only playable between Crewe and Stafford, a section that will also be part of the WCML Trent Valley add-on. Curiously, the British Transport Police Class 350 doesn't have any services at all in the Class 805 timetable. Thinking back to the Class 323, one of her services in this timetable is recreating the Farewell Rail Tour that ran in September 2024. There's a bug with the escalators at Birmingham New Street, in the sense that you can walk up the escalator, but a one-way invisible wall prevents you from going back down. This happens on all the escalators at this station, even when they're moving down, like this one between platforms 6 and 7. Must resist obvious reference. Not many stations on this route have lifts, but even as those that do, the implementation of working lifts is quite inconsistent. The only stations at which I have found working lifts were Smethwick Rolfe Street, Sandwell and Dudley, Wolverhampton, Stafford and Crewe.
Footbridge. Doors opening. Lift going down.
Thinking back to Sandwell and Dudley, only one of the lifts at this station actually works. The other one is a non-functioning dummy, as I will demonstrate here.
Doors closing. Platform. Doors opening. Lift going up.
The next train to arrive at Platform 1 will be the 11:37 West Midlands Railway service to Walsall, calling at Sandwell and Dudley, Smethwick Galton Bridge, Smethwick Rolfe Street, Birmingham New Street, Duddeston, Aston, Whitton, Perry Bar, Hampstead, Tame Bridge Parkway, Bescott Stadium, and Walsall. Platform 1 for the 11:37 West Midlands Railway service to Walsall.
As for any other bugs that I spotted, most of them were NPC related, but I also saw one instance of a Class 350 running an AI service with their pantograph down. New York to Trenton flashbacks intensify. Meanwhile, there were NPCs randomly appearing and disappearing on the platform at Dudley Port, without actually walking around the station. NPC spawn points clearly visible on the platform at Tipton and other stations, when I thought spawn points were supposed to be in locations inaccessible and invisible to the player. And another glitch with NPCs disembarking from a Class 350 at Crewe. These problems with the NPCs are not isolated to this one route, and quite frankly, I'm starting to get sick of the NPC bugs and how they still haven't been fixed. Another bug of which I am absolutely sick is the infamous disappearing fog in dynamic weather. Sure, you could set the weather to custom when you're selecting a service, since that means the weather won't change while you're driving, but I would argue that shouldn't be necessary because the fog bug shouldn't be happening in the first place. I question why Dovetail still hasn't fixed the fog bug yet. Wanting a game or DLC, for which one has paid, to not be hindered by major bugs shouldn't be too much to ask for. As for performance, it's better than I was expecting on my end, averaging between 45 and 80 frames per second most of the time, but it can drop to around 35 FPS depending on the scenery density or number of trains present in a given location. Weirdly, there's a massive drop in frame rates at Smethwick Rolfe Street when you're looking up at the station building from the platforms. I have no idea what's causing the frame rate drop, since this sort of issue doesn't happen anywhere else on the route. I've heard of people having crashes to desktop while using this route, but surprisingly, that didn't happen to me at all during this review's production. On the whole, I don't really know what to make of All Aboard Studios' WCML Birmingham to Crewe. I wanted to like this add-on, and to an extent, I think it's now a reasonably solid item of DLC with decent looking trackside scenery, well detailed stations, and welcome improvements to the Class 350, barring the penalty brake palaver. However, there are still some areas in which there is room for improvement, but regardless of overall DLC quality, I agree with those who think it's annoying that you have to buy a sizable number of extra add-ons if you want to get anywhere near a realistic rail scene. That kind of situation doesn't just apply to this one route, unfortunately. Even so, the busy timetable, with varying stopping patterns, helps to keep the route interesting despite its linear nature, although I'm not sure where I would rate the overall add-on out of 10. Regardless, if you've stuck around to the end of the video, you win an American rap album that was rewritten to be about Class 33 diesel locomotives. It's straight outta Crompton.